Okay, so carry on with the build of our rotor head. The next thing for us to do is to assemble the bell mixers, and I've laid out the two bell mixers much as they are shown in the manual. And the basics of this assembly are that we need to put the two bearings here either side of the bell mixer with this little spacer in between them, and these are held in with green Loctite. And then having done that, we can then install this ball and this ball onto our bell mixer, and this ball and this ball onto our bell mixer, securing it with blue Loctite. And then once we've done that, we're able to put these screws through the mixer to bolt them onto our rotor head. But that step comes a little bit later. First of all, we need to get the two mixer arms mostly assembled, and then we're ready to look at where they need to be bolted. Okay, what I'm just showing here is the little spacer that goes between the two bearings. So I've already put a bearing in that side and Loctite it in place, and then the little spacer, as you can see here, the gold spacer goes in the middle, and then our second bearing goes in and is green Loctited above it, sandwiching that little gold spacer between the two. Okay, and there we have two completed bell mixers. What I just want to show you is that, just bring this a little bit closer, the ball here is mounted onto the flat side, so you can see there's a rounded side and a flat milled side, and you mount this ball to the flat milled side, and by default it goes in the inner hole position, not the outer one. And then the other ball is screwed on the other end, as you can see on the end here. Okay. Okay, next we're working with the head block. We have the head block here, and all we're going to do is to insert two dampers each side into the hole here, and then push the feathering spindle through. So two dampers this side, two dampers the other side, and then push the feathering spindle through. Okay, and that should give you this end result. You can see the feathering spindle through the head block, and then the dampers either side. And we can put that to one side with our bell mixers we assembled earlier, and the next part is for us to assemble our blade grip. Okay, so what I've done here is I've laid out all the components for putting together our blade grip, so I can show you this in a little bit of detail. First of all, we have our feathering spindle bolt, then a little silver washer, then our thrust race with the race with the larger hole in it here and the one with the smaller hole in it towards the outside of the blade grip. Then we have a shim washer. Then we have the larger of the blade grip bearings, and then a spacer washer, and this brass washer is quite thick. You can see I turned it on its side, it's actually quite a thick washer. Then the part of the blade grip itself, then a smaller radial bearing, then a brass shim, and this is much narrower than the shim that goes on the inside here, and then a very small silver shim, and that's the order in which everything goes onto the blade grip and onto the feathering shaft. And then for our blade grips themselves, which are these carbon pieces, we have these small screws to bolt it all together. And of course there's always one bit that I miss out, which is this little square piece here, which mounts down here. So I just forgot to add that in, but that's where that piece goes. Okay, so we'll take this a step at a time, and our first job is to get this bearing into the back of our blade grip there. We need to put some green Loctite on it and just push it into the blade grip. Okay, and there we go, there's our bearing installed. The next thing we need to do is turn the grip up the other way, and we're going to put the large brass spacer, which looks like this, into the blade grip, and it sits in that recess in there, as you can see. And the next thing for us to do is to install the much larger bearing, which is this one, into our blade grip, and then that pushes down into the blade grip. Now I'm going to do that off camera. Okay, so you can see that bearing is now pushed down into the grip, and the next thing for us to do is to insert our thrust bearing spacer, this small spacer here, that goes into the blade grip like so. You just need to make sure that's located properly, like that. There we go. And then the next thing we can do is install our our thrust race, and I just need to explain how to work out which way round to put the thrust races in. Okay, so what I've done here is I've just got my head block and I've put the thrust races onto the head block, and as you can see, one of them is a very loose fit and one of them is a tight fit, and it's the one that's the loose fit which needs to go next into our blade grip. Okay, and to complete this process we insert the blade grip onto the feathering spindle, and then we bolt it in place with some blue Loctite on this bolt to hold that onto our feathering shaft. Okay, so it should look like that, and then we repeat that whole process for the blade grip on the other side. Okay, and when you're finished you should end up with something that looks very similar to this. So we can now move on and build our blade grips, the carbon parts rather than these metal parts. Okay, so here we have our blade grip, and the first task is for us to install this metal part onto there like so, and this is the holder for our bell mixer, which is going to bolt into the little screw hole here. Now you must make sure that when you bolt this together, the side of the blade grip that's got a sort of beveled cutout within it is facing that metal block, and also make sure that your hole on your metal block is facing outwards for you to mount the bell mixer later. Okay, so there we have it mounted up. Now make sure that the hole here is towards this side and not towards the it's in fact the outside of the blade grip. So the blades are going to insert into our blade grip here. This side is towards our head block, and you need this hole here to be towards the head block side rather than towards the blade side of the grip. This is our blade mount hole here. Okay, so next we're going to mount one of our previously assembled bell mixers onto that hole of that metal block we've just bolted onto the carbon blade grip. And when we tighten this up, we need to make sure that our bell mixer is able to move freely. Okay, and there we have our bell mixer installed, and we can now bolt this first half of our carbon blade grip onto our previously assembled blade grip and head block. Okay, so there we have that installed, and we now need to repeat that process for our other blade grip, which goes on the other side here. So just one half, as you can see here, I've only installed one half, but we now need to do the other half on the other side over here. Okay, so there we have each upper blade grip mounted onto the head. So you can see, there we go, like that. And the next job, you can probably guess, is to bolt the lower carbon blade grip onto there on each side, and then that finishes the top of our head block. Okay, and there we have the finished carbon blade grips, and we can now move on to the next build step. Okay, so our next step is to build up the flybar cage, and I've laid it out here as it shows in the manual. Our first task is to install these small bearings here into the end of the flybar cradle seesaw. This is done with green Loctite as per all the other bearings in the build. Okay, so next we're going to install the flybar seesaw into the head block. So if we pick up our head block, you'll notice that one side has a bearing installed into it and the other side doesn't. So we hold it like this with the bearing towards us, and then we pick up our flybar carrier and we orientate it like that and insert it into the head block, and then bolt through to secure that in place through here. And there we have it installed. As you can see, it moves nice and freely. We now need to work on the other side here, and for that we need three things. We need the bearing that's going to be installed in the hole there, and then we need these three screws to mount it. One is an ordinary button head screw and the other are like flat head Phillips head screws, and they bolt into there. The button head screw holds the bearing in place through the middle, and then the two smaller screws go either side and just clamp that bearing in to make sure it can't come out. Okay, so there we have those three screws in place and the bearing installed with the usual green Loctite, and our flybar seesaw is nice and free to move. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is build up our flybar cage. So the first job for us to do is to install the ball links onto the cage balls. And this is just a simple case of threading it on and clicking it into place. Okay, so there we have both links installed, and the next thing we need to do is to put the little grub screws into the ends of the flybar cage. So if I just grab the ends of the flybar cage here, and these have a grub screw each, and they need to be inserted in there in the back. You can see the hole there. Just need to put the grub screw loosely into there, and then we need to get hold of these other screws, which are for mounting these parts onto the ends of the cage, and thread those through as well, and then we're in a position to start assembling our cage. Okay, so that's one side of the cage made up, ready for the next part of our build. I just wanted to show you that on these particular end pieces, one side of this has recesses within it which actually go towards the cage arms or the sides of the cage. The other side of this is flat, doesn't have any recesses in it, and that should be outwards. So the flat side goes outwards and the side with recesses within it goes in towards those two cage sides. Okay, so I can put this grub screw here into this now, and then we can insert our fly bar through this cage and through our head block. Okay, so there's our fly bar inserted through the cage, and then this whole thing inserts through the centre of our fly bar seesaw. So here's our seesaw, and the fly bar needs to go through there and out the other side. Okay, so there we have it. It's now inserted as you can see, and this is still loose. What we now need to do is to get our other end and slide that on and bolt it into place just like the other side, and then we're in a position to centre up our fly bar and do up these grub screws. And we've also still got to bolt these little control balls onto the seesaw down here. Okay, so there's our other end installed, and what I've also done is I've centred up the fly bar. I've got 76mm of fly bar sticking out from the edge of the fly bar cage to the end of the fly bar, and 76mm the other end as well, and that centred that up. Also note the orientation, note the orientation here of the cage, in that it's sloping downwards away from the blade grips when it's installed, and those pieces can bend down now like that. Okay, so the next job for us is to install the balls onto the seesaw. Have those here, 2 balls and the screws to mount them. Okay, and then we can see that's now mounted, and it's gone in the centre hole on the seesaw, and also the same the other side. We've mounted the ball here on the other side. Okay, so that's the build of the rotor head complete, apart from installing our fly bar paddles on the ends of the fly bar. But this could now be installed onto our rotor head on our main machine, or onto our main mast on our mostly built machine. Okay, so our next job is in fact installing our fly bar paddles. These are a straightforward plastic paddle with a cutout which spells XL, which is kind of nice, in them, and we need to cover these with a clear plastic cover, and this is actually on the decal sheet. The plastic you cover these with is on the decal sheet. I'm rooting around in the box for this, but basically here's the decal sheet, and you can see here these 2 cutouts here, and these are basically the covering for our fly bar paddles. So we need to cut those out with scissors and then stick them around the paddle to create a nice clean aerofoil. Okay, so there we have both paddles covered, and they're ready for installation onto our fly bar. Okay, so there we have our paddles installed, and this gap here from one paddle to the paddle to the side of the fly bar carriage is 60mm on each side. Okay, so our next task is to install our rotor head onto the main shaft, and the main shaft has a hole in it, and it also has a cutout in it, which you can see here, a little indentation or cut. If I just spin the main gear around, you can get there we go, you can see there's that indentation, and basically the rotor head is mounted with 2 screws. One screw goes through the head, the other screw goes alongside the head, and basically makes sure that that it can't twist on the main shaft. So it's a double kind of clamping system. If I show you the rotor head, let's just come out a little bit. Okay, you can see the 2 holes here, the 2 mounting holes. This is the hole where the screw goes right the way through the head, and then this is the one where the screw goes down the edge of that groove. So when you mount the head, you have to line up both those screw holes and then put a screw into each. Okay, so there we have our rotor head bolted onto the main shaft. I just come out a little bit and try to show you. If you look in here, you can see there are a couple of pins on the bottom of the head block which locate into the washout base in there. I don't know if I can get a bit of a tighter angle on this possibly. Yeah, there we go, you can see the pins going into the washout base there. And I've also, just turn this around a bit, connected up the linkage here that goes from the cage down to the washout. So we have some more linkages to make up now. There is a link that goes from the middle of the swash plate up to our mixer arm up the top here on the rotor head. And there is also a link that goes from here to the flybar seesaw as well. So from the blade grip, let's come out a little bit more. There we go. From the blade grip to the flybar seesaw. So we've got 4 links to make up to install onto here as well. And then once we've done that, we've got one more long link to install, which we haven't put on just yet, which is one we made a lot earlier, which is our tail rotor linkage. And then once we put that on, we've just got the canopy to make, and then we're finished. Okay, so here's my head linkages. The ones that are effectively the blade grip link between the seesaw and the blade grip arm itself. I've got about a 1mm gap between the ball links, and these longer ones it's about 42mm. But whether these linkage lengths are correct or not I won't know until I come to try and set up the machine. So we'll install those onto the machine. Okay, and there we have the final linkages installed, the blade grip linkages which I've just put on, and also the linkage which goes from the swash plate up to the bell mixer at the top here. So the only linkage that's missing on this machine now is the servo linkage here at the rear, which was missing from my kit, which I'm just waiting for a replacement part in the post to put that on. And I've also now installed the tail push rod at the back here for my tail. So mechanically and electronically that's the machine built. We've just got to make up the canopy now in order to finish it.